What's going on, everybody? Happy New Year, happy holidays. We have missed you, and we have officially made it to 2021.
Insert
Chris,
celebration sound effect.
Yes, 2020 is behind us. We've done it. We missed you guys. We took a little bit of a hiatus, kind of a holiday hiatus, if you will. We just wanted some time, wanted to spend some time with the family, slow down a little bit, and take in some of the good movies.
You went gambling.
Got very involved in gambling. Things got a little bit ugly there for a while. The podcast was kind of teetering, but we pulled it out. We made it. 2020 is behind us.
Actually, there's an interesting story there because he bet the deed to the podcast, because that's how podcasts work. You have a deed. And,
I bet the deed to my house, which includes my podcast studio. So
right.
No house, no studio,
we got it back.
And we got it back. Had to do some things I'm not proud of, but here we are. I'm excited, man. I'm excited for this year. We're going to have to talk about some New Year's resolutions here in a little bit. I don't know. The same old resolutions. I keep making them and I keep failing. You know what I mean? But maybe this year will be different. Maybe it'll be a little bit different. We were able to soak up some good movies there right at the end of 2020, and now we're going to do some early reviews here in 2021, starting today with probably one of the most highly anticipated movies of 2020. Chris, let's talk about Soul first today. Pixar's big movie. Of course, there was some discussion about whether this thing would even be released this past year, whether it would come out in theaters or straight to Disney Plus. As we all know, it came out to Disney Plus, and not only did it come out straight to Disney Plus, they didn't charge us for it. Which I thought that was pretty nice. Yeah. I had very much expected this to be sort of a Mulan thing where, I mean, heck, even if nothing else, they charge us $5-10 for it. I
would have paid that.
Yeah, I would have too. I have no problem forking over some money for Pixar movies. I would have gone and seen this in the theaters had it been in theaters, and obviously paid money to do that. But here we are, man. So let's talk about Soul, Chris. Just big picture, first impressions. Did this movie live up to the hype? What did you think going into this? Did you have any expectations for this? And then how did it do?
I didn't know if I had any expectations for it. It's I kind of just expect Pixar to blow me away every time at this point. They're like, even when their movies aren't the best, they're still good. They're fun. I didn't really know what to expect for this one. I also didn't really quite know what it was about. The trailer was a little vague. I wasn't really sure, but it definitely tugs at your heartstrings. That's for sure. Like it. Yeah. I really really liked this movie. I think it's definitely one of the best Pixar movies to come out recently. And if anything, out of all of the Pixar movies that they have put out, this one has some of the most heart. And I think that's saying a lot, because Pixar does a lot with, emotional ties to movies and stuff. They're always trying to do that to you. And yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I would 10 out of 10. I would watch it again. Okay. Well, we're going to start off 2021 on an interesting foot then, because I actually did not like this movie all that much. Really?
And that surprised me coming out of this. I'm with you. It seems like Pixar can kind of do no wrong. Now, I will say we reviewed Onward on this channel, and I wasn't blown away by Onward either.
True.
I liked Onward. Definitely didn't dislike it. You can look at our review of that one if you're just finding our channel. I was not blown away by that movie.
Is that episode
either.
1? I think that's episode 1.
Story. Yeah, I think that is episode 1. That's way back. That's OG Critic and the Common Man. But, I wasn't blown away by Soul either, I gotta say. Now, let me also preface that by saying, full disclosure, I had family over for the holidays, which is part of the reason why we weren't able to do any recording, for a couple weeks there. My house, there was like 4 dogs running around. There was 6 people in my house, and one of which being like a 5-year-old, my nephew, who was just running around going crazy. Obviously, we sat down thinking we could watch Soul with a young kid, because usually Pixar movies can hold the attention of someone young. Mm-hmm. This Pixar movie, kind of unbeknownst to us, took a little bit more of a mature turn. Yep. And so he had kind of lost interest, understandably so. So it was hard for me to kind of settle in and get that emotional
I can see
relationship, that kind of bond with this movie, because it was just kind of hectic. But that being said, I was a little bit let down with this one, man. So let's talk about this and try to figure out where the gap is a little bit. some things about this movie that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. The immediate one to me was I felt like I was never really able to settle into the storyline for this because I almost felt like we were watching 3 movies.
I agree.
Like there's the beginning where you get Joe as Joe, and he's passionate about jazz, and he loves music, and he's kind of a teacher stuck in a rut. And you know from the trailer that he's going to die. You know that coming in watching the trailer. Oh, by the way, if you haven't seen Soul, this is your full spoiler warning. If you haven't seen any Critic and the Common Man reviews, we do full reviews with spoilers and everything. So please, if you have not seen Soul, go check it out, then come back and watch this. It's on Disney+. That being said, I'm assuming most of you guys have seen it and are still with us. Yeah, I felt like we were in 3 movies. So there's Joe in the beginning. Then there's Joe once he dies and becomes, his soul. And I thought that is where the meat and potatoes of this movie was going to stay, as Joe being this kind of soul version. And it was weird. It was kind of trippy. It was a little bit complex, and I'm okay with that. But then I felt like right as I started to settle into that storyline and get on board with that, then all of a sudden it's Joe is the cat and 22 is Joe, and then there's that storyline. And I never was able to really kind of settle into any of those storylines of themselves a little bit.
Yes. And I agree with pretty much everything you said. And before I get into that, like let's what did you like about the movie? What things worked for you?
Yeah, I liked with Pixar the obvious one is the animation, the quality, the soundtrack, the just the quality of the movie was of course there. It's like the biggest animation studio in the world. I liked Joe's character. I liked his personality in this, and I liked their representation of, or their almost analogy of, or I should say depiction rather, of how souls come to be, and kind of taking a really complex idea, of time and space and life, and breaking that down into like an interesting representation with, like the lady who was like the abstract kind of shape.
Yeah.
And
Terry?
That was interesting. Yes, that was interesting to me. I thought that was kind of unique, and it was a complex subject for Pixar to take on, and I thought they did a good job of breaking it down into kind of understandable terms. That worked for me.
Did you like Inside Out?
I did like Inside Out, and we talked about Inside Out when we were watching this because there was definitely some relation kind of in the story. But what about you? What worked about this movie for you? What did you really like?
Honestly, the first thought that crossed my mind when I was watching this movie, I couldn't help but think that this was a movie that I believe in. I don't think this for a lot of movies, but I think this is a movie that Walt Disney himself would have been proud of, because he himself experimented with Fantasia, with the use of color and visuals to complement music, and have the music complement the visuals. He did that with Fantasia. That was an artistic experiment that he wanted to do. And this movie, I feel like, had to have taken some influence and some inspiration from the Fantasia films, because you really do see in the background, the flowing colors and the abstract shapes, and it is, I believe, something that Walt Disney would have been like, wow, I wish I could have done this back in my day.
I like that. That's pretty deep. Yeah, that's pretty deep. And you're right. There was, as far as the visual, excuse me, I just swallowed water.
Are you all right?
2021's off to a good start.
Yeah.
As far as like the visual and how gripping this movie was, I'm with you. It was all there. The animation was great. The characters were great. The minority representation was great. But I like where you're going with that. The color palette was impressive, and the visual representations of
and just the
complex
use
ideas
of the music too, like the abstract, because jazz it's in itself is abstract. It's very different type of music, and so to have that complemented with this abstract theory, like it definitely all, like, the theme is there of this other sort of perspective of things. I love the visuals. Obviously the visuals and the acting and everything is phenomenal. But you're right, the story itself lacked something. The movie fumbled on like the delivery And
well, and let me jump in here too and say this, because to kind of come full circle here a little bit with other Pixar reviews we've done. I don't know if you remember this, but in our review of Onward, one of the qualms that we had was that there's not really a villain in the story. And sometimes you kind of need that to push the story along. And so the only person they're sort of working against was that accountant guy who was kind of trying to figure out who was missing and why a soul was off. But he wasn't really evil, and he wasn't really bad. He was just doing his job.
Yeah.
And we had that same issue with Onward, where there's just you almost lack a like a purpose as they're moving forward. You almost lack some sort of like something to speed it up a little bit.
Yeah, and I agree. Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that this was a bad movie or anything like that, and I'm not like trying to sway you either way on it. I found myself coming away from this movie really, honestly, a little bit unimpressed, or I guess I should really say underwhelmed. I was a little bit underwhelmed for what I expected it to be, and then as I was trying to figure out why, those were the things I started coming up with.
I think I get what you're saying, and I think it would be unfair to say that every movie has to have a villain, because there's plenty of movies that don't, and I think what you're saying is that there wasn't enough conflict.
Yeah,
because the only real conflict that you have in this movie is that he's racing against time. That's it. The stakes aren't really going up from there, except that like, oh, now he's in the wrong body. And you're right. It does feel like it's three different movies. It does feel like three different story arcs that are kind of never really completed. Even at the very end, you don't really know how it ends because you don't see him take the jump.
Right.
It's just it's a little underwhelming. It is. But I think for musicians, I think this movie was probably.
Oh, I love the idea of passion and purpose in this movie, because those are things that you and I talk about outside of the podcast a lot. Yep. What do we want to do? And that's a very common, man's search for meaning. This is a very common conundrum that people, everybody kind of faces at some point. And it seems like, you look at people, and some people seem to have themselves figured out really early what they want to do and who they want to be. And then there's people like me who are still trying to figure it out along the way, going on 27, 28, 30, 40, 50, whatever.
80.
80, yeah, 80 plus. Oh, come on. You were 80 last year, 81. That I think a lot of people can appreciate. The music and the styling I thought was very good. The minority representation was interesting in this too. How he, the lead in this was a person of color, and they didn't try to push that down your throat or put it in your face. It was just a great movie, and that was who the lead was. I appreciate that. I think that needs to just be the norm.
Yeah.
For all of these films. I just it seemed like they were building up. My other qualm with this movie is it seemed like they were really building up and building up and building up for this big dramatic ending. And I didn't really get that for me. That the ending was kind of a bust for me.
Yeah, the sailing the ship through the dream, whatever that was, it wasn't really as intense as it could have been, especially when you're on a pink ship. It was cute, it was cool, but I think they, for something that was as heavy and as adult themed as this was, triple X themed, it didn't have, there wasn't enough of either side. Like, a kid can't watch this. And then the little stuff that they did put in that was meant for children didn't mesh well with the stuff that was, more thematically on like the, for an older audience. And then on top of that, it just felt like the story itself didn't complete the arc didn't complete itself. Like I said, like you have this story about Joe who wants to be this musician, and then he slowly finds out through the movie that he was kind of self-absorbed, but you don't really get anything from that. Right. Like the barbershop guy was like, oh, well, you never really asked. And you see that moment where he's like, oh man, but you don't, at the end of the film, you're not seeing him give that part away. Like you don't get the feeling that like, oh, he's not going to be selfish anymore. because he's going back still to go do the music, and so it just doesn't feel like the story. There was too much going on in the story. They were trying to do too many themes, and they didn't deliver it well.
I agree. Let's dive into what you were saying there a little bit more, because I think this is a hot topic for this movie too. Let's dive into the target demographic for this, specifically the age of people that are going to be watching this movie, because you said something there and you said a kid can't watch this movie. And I think that's a very important point for Soul, because I guarantee you that there are a lot of families that sat down with their young kids, me included, with my nephew, thinking that it's going to be Pixar, so it's something, this is the animation studio that brings you Toy Story.
Yeah.
You're thinking, oh, this is Pixar, this is Coco, this is Onward, these are kids movies, these are family movies, let me say that. But I am completely on board with what you said, where I don't think this is a kids movie at all. I don't think that kids would appreciate this movie, and I can certainly attest to the fact that we sat down to watch this with a 5-year-old, and he sat there for maybe 20 minutes and then was completely disinterested because he had no idea what was going on.
How do you as a child relate to that? How do you relate to
how
not having a passion?
To finding, yes, exactly. And what do you think of Pixar and not to say Pixar can't do this, but what do you think of Pixar kind of taking the step in a direction of making a movie that's for an older demographic? I think that's a big move that they didn't really kind of market very well. They didn't prepare people for very well.
It's something that I think is more in line with the original Pixar before they were Disney. A darker, willing to go into darker stories. Because the original story for Toy Story was a lot darker than what they had, but with their partnership with Disney and stuff, they ended up kind of rewriting the story. And so, I don't know, I feel like Pixar is kind of finding itself a little more every time they put a movie out. This movie's ambitious. This movie is really ambitious. You're taking on a very complex, heavy story with a lot of intricate pieces, and I think they just needed to rework the story a little bit. We didn't need the cat. That was, I think, something that was meant for the kids and it wasn't necessary to the story. I feel like there could have been somewhere else they would have pushed it.
I remember being psychologically disappointed when he woke up in that cat's body. I remember watching that movie and thinking, okay, this is kind of interesting. I wasn't super into it. And then he wakes up in that cat's body and I'm like, this is seriously going to be the last 45 minutes of this movie? He's a cat now?
Well, and the problem with that is that it when he did that, it became 22's story, not Joe's story, because now it's a story about her living, about her experiencing
that's the other
life.
thing. I feel like with this one, I only watched one trailer, because they didn't put out a ton of information about this one ahead of time. You got 1 or 2 trailers, which normally I like. It's okay, I don't want to flood myself with trailers to a point where I know what's going to happen before it happens. But with this, I felt like I almost watched a completely different movie than what I was marketed.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're right. I felt like this became the movie about 22 and not so much about Joe.
It was half one story and half the other, and neither really felt complete. And not to say that it's bad, because it's not. I think this is a movie that deserves to be watched a few times to really get a good idea of what it's about, just like Inside Out. Because Inside Out is also another very kind of heavy film, but that movie was executed a little better, because they meshed the child and the adult, because it's a story about a child and the adults around her, and so I think this movie just kind of missed the mark a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. I feel like it really missed the mark, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. I mean, it's Pixar. They obviously, their resume speaks for itself. But I got to say, this is 2 movies now that Pixar's come out with pretty recently. Was Onward the most recent Pixar movie before this one?
Yeah.
I wasn't blown away with Onward either.
No.
It was not a bad movie. I liked that movie. I actually liked Onward more than I liked this, but I'm not rushing to go rewatch Soul, just like I'm not really rushing to go rewatch Onward, but there are a lot of Pixar movies that I would still watch, all the time. It wasn't a bad movie to me. When it was all over, I couldn't help kind of thinking to myself, okay, so what? It was just a little bit, it just sort of was underwhelming to me. I felt underwhelmed by this one.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of reasons why. I think the biggest one is the story. It just, the writing wasn't 100%. and I think we as an audience have come to expect a lot from Pixar, and I think we can just tell when they're not. But again, I personally liked the movie, and I think that it was just a very complex story and a very ambitious project to take on. And when half of this film was made, from people's houses, so it's just,
Right.
yeah.
It was very ambitious. It was very ambitious. I agree with that. I just I expected a little bit more power, a little bit more heart out of this one. I can't say that this blew me away, and I definitely won't say that it's my favorite Pixar movie. The quality of it was absolutely there. It got good reviews, obviously. It gets the Pixar bias. I think, honestly, Pixar could come out with a bad movie. Not that this was a bad movie, but Pixar could come out with a bad movie and still get a 90%, audience score on Rotten Tomatoes just because it's Pixar, and I get that. This one got a 95% critic score and an 89% audience score. So an 89% audience score for a Pixar movie is a little bit lower, which, again, an 89% is still a phenomenal score. So we're not talking about a huge drop here, but it is a little bit lower. And I think some of the things we mentioned, the fact that the story never really was able to get into its groove, the fact that there wasn't really the powerful ending that we were wanting, the fact that it was for a more mature audience, and the fact that it kind of fell flat a little bit. I think those things kind of come into play. I'm sure there are a bunch of families that sat down with their kids and their kids did not like it, didn't care about it because they couldn't relate to it, and the parents were probably pretty disappointed in that.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Pixar can do that. It's just, it was a little unexpected. Where do your ratings for this one come in comparison to a 95 and an 89?
Close. The movie itself delivered a lot, I think. I think that there's a lot words. English. There's a lot to like. There's a lot of things to also, take with a grain of salt. Most of all the writing, like I keep saying. But I liked the visuals. I liked the complementing music, the score with the visuals especially. The acting was phenomenal. Obviously, you have Tina Fey and Jamie Foxx and a bunch of, amazing actors. But the story just got a little too convoluted and it became a little too hard to follow, and it wasn't interesting enough to really keep you involved emotionally.
Right.
The emotional level for me where it peaked was when he was kind of remembering what it was like to be alive and the purpose of life. That's where I felt the most connected to the character because it was a real human moment.
Right.
Other than that, it's definitely a film, I think, made for musicians, and I think musicians probably like this a lot more. Although, with that said, I really enjoyed the film. I would watch it again. And I come in a little lower than everybody else. I give it an 8 out of 10. I think there's some things that just didn't quite work for it that I think could have been done better. And I think over time, as the score is updated, after the nostalgia and everything wears off, I think the score is going to drop a little bit as people.
Yeah, I could see it.
But 8 out of 10. I did enjoy it. I liked the movie, and but it is not my favorite Pixar film, and I think that there are other Pixar films that can touch you emotionally more than this one. So.
Yeah, I think that's fair. An 8 out of 10, I think, is a pretty good score. I'm a little lower than that. I agree with you. There were some touching moments in this, and I do think there was an important message in this. I really liked when the famous jazz musician was kind of telling the story about, the fish that goes, and he's like, I want to go to the ocean, or this is water. I want the ocean. She's like, this is the
deep.
ocean. You know what I mean?
That was so deep.
And I think that was sort of where this movie was wanting to go the whole time. It was trying to tell you that you have to appreciate all the things in life, the imperfections, appreciate where you are, because when you're seeking this dream, you think you've made it. That's a fallacy. You could get to your dream and then realize that you've been there all along, and this unending search for purpose that people seem to find themselves in, especially now. Nobody knows what they want to do.
Yeah.
You see a million people doing a million things on social media, and everyone's chasing after that moment. But I think it is important to kind of slow down, appreciate the life that you have and the amazing things that make it, all the imperfections that do.
And I think that's ultimately the message of the movie.
It is. I think for all the flaws that we talked about, for the fact that I just didn't quite get into it enough. It was too many stories, fell a little bit flat. I think this movie for me actually gets a 7 out of 10. I'm not in any rush to go rewatch it, although I probably need to. I probably need to sit down when it's just me and it's, quiet and I can actually get a little more into it. I probably do need to watch it again, and I would imagine if I did that, it's possible my score would climb a little bit.
I think...
but I'm pretty... Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to say that I think this might be the next movie I make a blog post about. Just because I want to take a little deeper dive into the message behind it and get a couple more watches and get an understanding of what the film's message is, and then write out my thoughts and see what I can come up with.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And it wasn't so on the nose as a lot of Pixar movies normally are. It's not about, these toys being, best friends and about friendship or about brotherly bonds or the love of your family, like
or
the normal kind of Pixar
racing.
Stories. Yeah, or car racing.
Or a tow truck that becomes a spy.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as on the nose as some of those are, but I don't know, man. It's just not my favorite. Probably, to be totally honest with you, probably my least favorite Pixar movie to date.
Even Cars 2? Cars 2?
Okay, you're right.
Somebody out there was like, fuck you, man, I love Cars.
If we're going into like the sequels for Cars, that's fine. You're right. So that's not fair to say. But one of my less favorite Pixar movies, and they're all good. It's not like you're gonna pick a bad movie. I don't know, man. I maybe my expectations killed me on this one. I felt like we were gonna get one thing and got a completely different movie out of it. So that's it. So a 7 from the common man and an 8 from the critic. Let us know down below what you guys think of this movie. Are we missing the mark here? Are we just totally off? Was this a 10 out of 10? Or are we just giving the Pixar bias and this was a 1 out of 10? Let us know what you guys think. Really excited to be back doing some reviews here in 2021. Happy New Year, everybody. 2021, starting off with a bang with Soul. Let us know what you guys think. Jump on over to our Instagram, Critic and the Common Man on Instagram. Give us some love there. Get involved. We have a lot of discussions. Other than that, we are out of here, you guys. We will see you probably in a few days for our next review. Peace.